know what this all has to do with this, but that's going to be some interesting conversation we'll have coming up later in the next couple of hours, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it sounds like that relationship, just from what I've read from his friends, from the suspect's friends, that relationship was very I guess, destructive for him, or very emotionally upsetting for him, and he kind of never got over it and talked about her a lot, though it was 10 years ago, and though he was remarried.
Hmm.
So yeah, we'll find out more as much as we can about the motive here.
Yeah, remarried with children, with a
Right.
family. Just a tragic story. Very close knit community. We're going to talk more about that coming up. Other news here, big movement today on the quest for peace in the Middle East this morning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they're joining President Trump at the White House yesterday as the president unveiled a very detailed 20-point plan to try to end the nearly 2-year war in Gaza. That plan calls for an immediate ceasefire, with Israel actually with being agreed to. Hundreds of detained Gazans, including women and children, would be released as well, alongside life sentence prisoners. So, a lot of developments on this in the last 12 hours or so. And we're going to see what the response is in the Arab world, right, Allison?
For sure, yes. I mean, obviously, everyone is so determined to get the hostages out and to get them home for those who are still alive. We're joined now by our foreign correspondent, Amy Kellogg, in Milan, with more on the details of this plan and reaction from the Arab world, from Hamas, from the European leaders. So, Amy, is this plan different than previous ones?
There is a lot of optimism about this plan, Allison, and a lot of praise has been pouring in about the plan. We've heard from the Arab states, from Saudi Arabia to the UAE, Egypt, and Jordan. The Europeans have endorsed it. The Palestinian Authority, which is the Palestinian body, governing body in the West Bank, has said that it believes that President Trump's efforts have been sincere and determined. So while Hamas has not yet said they're under has not said yes. They are under incredible pressure to agree to the deal, because if there is further bloodshed, if this deal blows up, then blame will be laid squarely on Hamas. Let's listen to President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu from last night.
If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal, followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. Now, if this international body succeeds, we will have permanently ended the war. Israel will conduct further withdrawals linked to the extent of disarmament and demilitarization, but will remain in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself.
So, Allison, back to your question, is this plan different from others? It provides an awful lot of detail, but I think most significantly is that President Trump is very engaged in it. And I think that means really that he's put the pressure that was needed on Prime Minister Netanyahu to wrap things up.
With that increasing pressure from President Trump on Netanyahu, how likely do you think this plan is now going to work?
People are cautiously optimistic, Mark, because, of course, we know that Hamas is very likely to have a whole lot to say about it. The Palestinians are really not involved in this transitional government that will lead Gaza until some later date. So I think there's a lot that could go off the rails at this point, but there is so much momentum right now when you consider that most of the Arab world is firmly behind this plan, that it seems again that the onus will be on Hamas ultimately to take it, or there is no way that they can going ahead put the blame on Israel for any further bloodshed or casualties in the Gaza Strip.
Significant also, Amy, that it's still open to the idea of a Palestinian state, even though Netanyahu has expressed his reservations about that being part of this plan.
Right, Jim. That is a very sticky issue, because for the Arabs to be behind this and to remain behind this plan, and I'm talking particularly about the UAE and the Saudis, those wealthy Arab states that will be very instrumental to the rebuilding of Gaza, they need to know that the Palestinians have a path forward to a state. So Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that he is going to resist a state, it goes against some of the wording in this plan, which is somewhat vague, but does say that this should or could provide the conditions for a viable pathway to Palestinian sovereignty and a Palestinian state. When you think about how President Trump laid this all out last night in that press conference, he said it's not just about Israel and Palestine, it's about the greater region and shoring up the Abraham Accords, which are these peace deals between Israel and some of the Gulf states. The key one that has not happened is between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And certainly, I believe that Saudi Arabia would need to see the pathway for a Palestinian state to be able to make a peace deal with Israel. So, as always, when it comes to the Middle East and these propositions, these potential peace deals, there are a lot of details that need to be worked out. But that 20-point plan does put a lot that's attractive for the Palestinians in place. Significantly, no one is planning to take over Gaza. It won't be annexed, it won't be occupied. President Trump and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair will be on this so-called board of peace to try to get some sort of government in place for the Palestinians. That is controversial to some people, but solid to others. And Hamas also, this is important, has an amnesty. If they hand over their weapons, they can leave Gaza or stay in Gaza, but it is an amnesty. And that is something that for the right wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet will be a tricky one. But still, in all, I think there's a lot in there to please both sides. And it's just a matter of whether Hamas now will give the go ahead. And we'll see from that point if it all goes smoothly. But again, cautious optimism, I think, is the word or the phrase of the day.
Amy, thank you. Thank you very much. We will have reaction from Israel from our correspondent, David Sussman, coming up at 8 a.m. there. And of course, guys, we haven't gotten an update on the hostages recently, but that is vital. There are estimates that I think 47 from the October 7th terror attack are still in captivity, and possibly half of those have been killed.
Right, about 20 believed to be still alive, I think is the number I saw most recently, Allison. And the big question is if Hamas does not agree to this, and as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, then we will continue this drive to root out Hamas. What happens then to the hostages and their release? We know the families are very concerned about that. We'll continue to watch that. All right, back here in this country, another big story we're following this morning, the countdown, it is on for the federal government to shut down at midnight tonight. That's unless Democrats and Republicans in Congress can agree to a last-minute deal. President Trump was busy yesterday. He met with top congressional leaders for both parties, but no deal came out of that. And Vice President J.D. Vance actually warned after the meeting that he believes the country is, quote, headed to a shutdown. Lawmakers in Washington, they're still deeply divided on how to fund the government and avoid this shutdown by October 1st, so midnight tomorrow. Democrats are pushing to extend those healthcare subsidies that keep your premiums down, while Republicans want to maintain current funding levels for 7 weeks. We know the Senate plans to bring up the House-passed funding bill for another vote on Tuesday in an effort to try to prevent a shutdown. And of concern is what will happen to federal workers if there is a shutdown. Furloughs, will there be permanent layoffs? That's also been something that's been on the table and been discussed a lot, I know.
Mark, if I had $1 for every time we were at the 11th hour before a government shutdown and there was all of this hue and cry, and then suddenly, somehow, lawmakers come together and all they do, as you know, is kick the can down the road. I mean, there's never
Right.
sort of a budget bill that lasts more than a few months, and then we're here again. So it's
Right.
hard I find it sometimes hard to get terribly exercised about what's going to happen. Although you guys will remember in 2018, the last government shutdown did happen under President Trump's first administration. And, something like 800,000 workers did have to go home. And there were also that caused a cascading effect of the
Right.
efficiency of
And if,
government. So it
and if
does
I had
happen.
$2 for every time the leadership of both parties, you see Jeffries and Schumer on one side, Mike Johnson and Senator Thune on the other, not talking to each other, well, of course we're going to be on the brink of shutdowns over and over again.
Also of interest, I thought, was the fact that there were reports coming out of that meeting at the White House that Schumer and Jeffries actually revealed information the president really wasn't that drilled down on in terms of the impact if these subsidies, for instance, to healthcare premiums go away, how that will actually impact everyday Americans. It's going to be more expensive for their healthcare. And it was reported that the president hadn't really taken that in and was listening. So perhaps, there'd be something that would convince him to push the Republicans to try to come up with some sort of deal. But we wait and see, right?
Absolutely. So we will bring to everyone the latest as soon as we get any information about those negotiations this morning. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to join Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in a meeting with top generals and admirals today. So late last week, Secretary Hegseth ordered hundreds of senior generals and admirals from around the world to come to Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. Now, this meeting is expected to be an all-hands session where Hegseth will try to highlight military accomplishments under his leadership. Hegseth is also expected to promote that rebrand that he wants at the Pentagon as the Department of War instead of Department of Defense. Now, little else, guys, is known about this meeting or why so many military leaders from across the globe need to attend in person. We have technology nowadays where you don't have to be in person, but they want this to be everybody in the same room.
Yes, the technology we're on right here. They could have done it this way, but they got that summons. You need to come to Virginia and be there in person, and sort of a pep talk. It seems they want to have
a rebranding effort from the Department of Defense to the Department of War. I guess they feel like they have to do this in person.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Now, mind you, it could be more difficult to find out what happens in that meeting because, as you know, Secretary Hegseth is also at the same time really trying to block reporters' access to what goes on inside the Pentagon. I mean, for decades, there has been a standard operating way that reporters are able to mill around in the halls of the Pentagon, talk to their sources, and that has given a level of transparency to the American public about what goes on in this vitally important department. Secretary Hegseth is trying to prevent that. So we'll see what information we get out of this meeting.
All right, Allison, we're glad you made it home from out west here back to the eastern seaboard because weather could be an issue along the Atlantic. We're following a tale of two storms out there with Hurricane Umberto and Tropical Storm Imelda. There they are. The big question, though, whether either or both of these storms are going to threaten the U.S. coast this week. There's a dynamic going on there that may push them out to sea. Let's bring in AccuWeather meteorologist Alex De Silva, who's been tracking the latest. Alex, so are they still interacting with each other?
Yeah, they certainly are, and they've gotten even closer since yesterday. They're starting to do that Fujiwara dance that we talked about for several days now. The storms are within about 500 miles or so of each other, and you need to get within about 850 miles, so well within that threshold. But we're still seeing impacts on the U.S. coast here. We're still seeing some rain in the Carolinas and along the east coast of Florida here. That should continue throughout the day today as Imelda begins to push away from the United States here over the next day or so. But like I said, they are starting to do that dance, the Fujiwara dance here. So you have Umberto here to the north in this case, and then Imelda is being pushed out underneath it, essentially. They rotate kind of counterclockwise around each other. So Humberto is really the saving grace for the United States. And I really do believe that if we didn't have Humberto there, we would be dealing probably with a direct hit on the United States. So here we go. Here's Humberto. We'll start with that one. Category 2 hurricane right now, expected to pass north of Bermuda sometime tonight or tomorrow. And then it's going to shoot off towards Europe here. It's going to become non-tropical, but it's going to become a huge windstorm, I think, for portions of Europe here. We could see winds in Ireland, the United Kingdom, 40 to 80 miles per hour. Some areas along western coasts of Ireland could see 80 to 100 mile per hour winds from the leftovers of Humberto as it's heading to the north. And then we'll check in on Imelda here, expected to become a hurricane sometime later today. And then it's going to be passing very, very close to Bermuda sometime Wednesday afternoon, potentially even making a direct hit on the islands. And then that one is also going to be shooting off to the north into the North Atlantic late this week, but it should remain mainly west of Europe.
Alex, I so appreciate you showing us the dance moves of the
Yeah.
Fujiwara dance. That was very cool. Thank you for demonstrating that. Any other trouble spots you're watching in the country?
Areas for tropical development. Again, we have till the end of November for the tropical season. So we got about two full months to go here. Tracking 2 areas, one here in the Bay of Campeche. Very low chance on this one to develop, but either way, it would be moving south. So no threat to the U.S. from this particular area. And then the other area, we're going to be tracking a tropical wave coming off of Africa here over the next couple of days. That'll be the next thing that we actually probably have to pay a little bit closer attention to. But again, 2 months to go. We still are in hurricane season, and we need to track things very closely.
All right,
Alex,
Alex.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Connecting America, just getting started this morning. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the death of a woman convicted of killing a New Jersey trooper and then fleeing to Cuba. It's sparking outrage today. We're going to tell you why when we come right back. Welcome back to Connecting America on this Tuesday morning. Allison, any activity in your kitchen this morning? It looks kind of quiet.
Okay, well, I was just eating a piece of toast, if you must know, and it was a little drier than usual. So I was worried about coming back from commercial break because I realized I could be chewing. But,
Who
crisis
and
averted.
and who do we have to blame for the food being dry?
The toaster. The toaster. It went overboard.
Okay.
But
It did.
where's the
It did.
butter? Where's the jam? You could make this
I
better.
have peanut butter. I have peanut butter and jelly on here. So,
Okay.
guys, I mean, I'm not giving up on it. I'm not throwing it out. I'm gonna keep eating it, but I'm
Yeah.
just gonna have to choose my timing a little bit better. So yeah, it'll get a little bit more active here when Tula wakes up. But in any event, let's talk about some other huge stories today.
Mhm.
So if you're under a certain age, the name Joanne Chesimard may not be familiar to you, but for legions of police officers across the country, this fugitive was a very important cause for decades. And now she has died, and her death is creating more anguish. Chesimard was a member of the Black Liberation Army. She was convicted in 1973 of murdering a New Jersey state trooper. She then broke out of prison and escaped to Cuba, basically, that gave her refuge. And that's where she lived in freedom until she died last week. So for decades, police pressed for her return to the States so that justice could be served. And they lobbied the State Department and public officials, but it never happened.
And as you mentioned, this happened a long time ago, Allison. We're talking in the early 70s, and she escaped in the later 70s. And joining us now to talk about this is someone who has never forgotten the murder of Trooper Werner Forrester or the day Joanne Chesimard escaped. It's New Jersey State Police Captain Thomas Van Tassek. Captain, thank you for being here on Connecting America. We appreciate it. And we understand you were on duty the night that Chesimard escaped from prison, right? Bring us back to that night.
Exactly. We received notification that Chesimard was escaped with three accomplices, armed accomplices from the minimum security ladies' prison in Annandale, New Jersey. And I responded with a group of tactical patrol members, along with everyone in the state police, to search for her. Sadly, she was long gone. Their plan was very well executed to escape her.
Officer, I had forgotten that detail that she was in a minimum security
Mhm.
prison. I mean,
Yes.
she was a convicted, police killer.
Yes, her attorneys convinced whomever in the judiciary to have her moved to a minimum security female prison in Annandale, which was exactly what they sought, so that they could do exactly what they did, enter to under the guise of visitations, three individuals, armed individuals, and at the time they hadn't searched those three individuals when they initially entered the facility. They entered into a visitation area and the inside area of the prison and drew their firearms, and everyone was at their command. So she was escaped that method and never to be found again on American soil.
Escaped to Cuba, where she lived out
Yes,
the rest of her days. What's been
exactly.
the reaction to hearing of her death in Cuba? What's been the impact on you and the other officers?
You know, we find solace in the fact that she has passed away. However, we surely wish that she would have been able to serve her just prison sentence in New Jersey.
Yeah. And have you been in touch with Trooper Forrester's family about this?
No, I have not, very sadly, but I haven't. I know that he left behind a young son at the time of his death. This incident occurred on May the 2nd, the early morning hours of 1973. I was only 22 years old at the time, and I was in the process of entering the state police then, and I didn't become a trooper until approximately 6 months later after this.
Now, this incident, servicing again through memory, there are two names that come up. There's Joanne Chesimard, and then Miss Chesimard chose to change her name to Asada Shakur. And under that name, some people regard her as a hero. What's your reaction to that?
You know, it's very sad that individuals, groups, political organizations decide to sanitize the ill deeds of this woman, of what she did. She was a murderer, and they talk about being a freedom fighter on her part. Well, Trooper Werner Forrester was executed on the side of the highway and never even drew his gun from his holster.
We know after she died, a social media post from the Chicago Teachers Union called her, quote, revered elder of Black liberation, a leader of freedom. Governor Murphy responded saying it was shameful and depraved and that Chesmart is not a hero to celebrate. But there are some politicians that we've not heard from, including Murphy's fellow Democrat Mikey Sherrill's running for governor. What would you want to hear from them?
Well, I'd like to hear from them the truth of the matter, and that she was a domestic terrorist creating crimes throughout the metropolitan area and an actual murderer. Why sanitize the fact that she killed an innocent victim, a trooper on the side of the highway as a result of a traffic stop? And there were another trooper with him, and both were shot. And sadly, Forrester never even drew his firearm. So he was the victim, but the troopers were the victims in this case, certainly not the conspirators on the side of Joanne Chesimard or Assata Shakur that she goes by.
Officer, do you know if her remains are going to be flown from Cuba here for burial?
I sincerely doubt that. I don't think they'll have anything to do with America, although I do know that she has a daughter living in America. So I'm not sure if they will do something in secret between the government of Cuba and her daughter.
But would you take any action? Is there anything that could be done if that were the plan?
With remains, I don't know necessarily believe there would be, because even after a person passes away in prison and or could have been even executed, the remains are not in the auspices of the government. They fall into with the family.
Trooper, are you concerned that the fact that Joanne Chesmard was never brought to justice here in the United States, that somehow people might consider it open season on law enforcement?
Well, I think that's become the wave of today. Uh,
All right, Captain, we appreciate you joining us here on Connecting America to share your thoughts on this crime from decades ago that is not forgotten. Really
Yeah.
appreciate his perspective on
Thank you,
that.
Captain. Thank you.
All right, coming up next, we continue our coverage of the Michigan church shooting. We're going to talk with a local resident about the community's reaction to that tragedy when we come right back. Welcome back once again to Connecting America, coming to you from the Sunrise Diner in Roselle Park, New Jersey. Allison joining us from her home headquarters there. And guys, we want to go back to our top story this morning, the deadly church shooting in Grand Blanc, Michigan. And we're pleased to be joined by Bill Harris, who is a retired broadcast anchor from Flint and also a longtime resident of Grand Blanc. Bill, thanks for being here this morning on Connecting America. We appreciate it. First of all, tell us where you
invitation,
were at
Jeff.
the time of the shooting and what you actually saw on Sunday.
Well, it is reflecting on that day. Social media had put out a rumor that an active shooter situation was underway about 11 o'clock, and I was preparing to go to my local house of worship, Holy Family Church. And as you can see here, the smoke billowing, all that smoke was visible as I was entering the parking lot of Holy Family Parish. And then we got confirmation that it was indeed an active shooter situation.
Oh my gosh, Bill, this scene just looks apocalyptic. It's just so awful. And tell us about this community. I mean, we understand that it's very tight knit, but tell us about Grand Blanc.
Well, Allison, I hope the rest of the nation understands that the Grand Blanc community is unlike any other that would try to come together in a natural disaster situation or a critical incident situation like what happened on Sunday. Here in Michigan, I mean, we're not, we've had our disasters before. We had a tornado here in Grand Blanc 2 years ago. We're just south of the Flint water crisis. Flint is only 5 miles up the road. So there's natural tendency in this community, not only in Grand Blanc, but all of mid-Michigan, to try and support one another, try and help one another. However, now, as the saying goes, it happened closer to home than many of us had hoped it wouldn't.
Bill, you've had some law enforcement active shooter training in the past. What was one of the overarching lessons you learned from that training?
An interesting question. We used to teach also safety in places of worship with a partner of mine. And of all the churches in the area that we would instruct, we would go to their house of worship and look at threat assessment and talk to the pastor or the rabbi. But there was always a sense on the volunteers that it can't happen here. And we try to reinforce that it can happen anywhere. Well, as I was entering my house of worship on Sunday, I silently said to myself, it happened here.
And now that it has, share with us what you're seeing in terms of what's being done to try to help your community cope and heal from this tragedy.
Well, there's a lot of evidence that there's grief, there's tears, there's fear. Talking to several generations, I'm a boomer, so I recall the JFK and those incidents. My daughter would be of the Columbine era, and now I have grandkids going to school here, and it touches me that when I hear my grandkids, one is in high school, the other is in grammar school, and both schools not far away from where this incident took place. There are different reactions. There is still fear, apprehension, but on the part of the grandkids, they're accustomed to locking in place something that never happened, when I was a kid. So I saw a lady yesterday outside of a local church in the parking lot with her hands spread out, and she was looking headward and she was praying. So I've got to believe there's a lot of fear still in this community, but there is no hesitancy that I can see where neighbor is looking to neighbor, parishioner is looking to parishioner, and total strangers are becoming neighbors and friends in search of consolation.
Bill, we're just learning a little bit about the suspect. It sounds like he has a long-standing, deep-seated hatred against the Mormon Church. Do you all have any information on your end of what his motivation was here?
I do not. And I have close kind of association with the local law enforcement agencies and some of the federal agencies. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole until the investigation is really complete. I mean, I've seen a lot of those thoughts on social media, but I'd rather say at this moment I wouldn't go there yet. Let's wait for the facts to come out.
Trend in these shootings lately. shootings at churches. We've had this shooting now at this Church of the Latter-day Saints. There was a shooting at a Catholic church in Minneapolis not long ago. There have been shootings at synagogues, Baptist churches. Do you think that this is what we're going to keep seeing in terms of shootings in the weeks and months ahead?
Weeks and months ahead, I wouldn't go that far to say, but churches are what we would call soft targets. By their sheer definition, I've talked to rabbis, pastors, Catholic priests, they want to keep their doors open, which is totally opposite of what you would expect to keep security in place of your place of worship. So, with that said, the proximity of this church is pretty much near I-75, a major expressway. The Holy Family Church. There were 3 or 4 churches just on this street alone, McCandless Road. So they're easy, soft targets, and if somebody wants to do ill harm, this is the place, unfortunately. How you minimize that threat is really dependent upon your congregation, your parish. There are some churches who have locked doors. You can't go into church. There are armed guards out in front, and there are cruisers out in front. And others are saying, no, this is a house of worship. All are welcome.
Bill, we haven't really talked with you this morning about the victims, and they should not be forgotten. We know this is a close-knit community. Did you know any of them? And I know they range in age from very young to in their 70s. What do you know about the people who are impacted by this directly?
The one thing in my life, anyway, when I get to become the 6 degrees of separation, as you and I discussed yesterday, I'm sure I have contact with people who attended that place of worship, the LDS Church. It's a large community. It's a large parish. It's a large church. Do I right now know? There are some friends of mine, friends of friends, friends of my daughter. So yes, we do have some connection there, but I don't know of anyone yet who attended that church that day.
Yeah. Well, Bill Harris, thank you very much. We really appreciate checking in with you and learning a little bit more about Grand Blanc during this awful time there. Thank you.
Aren't those images
Just,
just stunning of the fire that ensued after the shooting?
yeah, and I mean, and as Bill just points out, his grandchildren are this generation
Hmm.
that where, gun violence at churches, at schools has become so ubiquitous that they're the shelter in place generation. And that has such a lasting impact, obviously, on their lives.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
appreciate his perspective so very much.
Yeah.
Allison?
All right. So up next, we're going to do something lighter because we all need it. And we're
Me
going
too.
to talk about classroom pets
Love
and
that.
how they're not just entertaining, Jim. They are also good for morale. They're also somehow good for your children's mental health and their grades. So we're going to explain that whole connection when Connecting America comes right back.
Is this an excuse for you to show us your dog?
Soon.
Okay.
She's napping.
She's still getting makeup.
Yeah, she's getting in hair and makeup. Exactly.
Welcome back to Connecting America from the Sunrise Diner in Roselle Park, New Jersey. We're glad to have you with us. I'm hearing an order going in. This sounds pretty good behind me from Priscilla putting in the order. Something
Have
about
you guys put in
cheese.
your breakfast order yet?
We have not yet. We've been a little busy.
Okay.
Doing what we have to do,
It's
but I need
okay.
an English muffin really bad right now.
Okay, we can make that happen. We can.
Red
In fact,
alert,
just turn around.
Priscilla.
Yeah.
All right, what else is
guys,
going on?
Well, there's more for the Jimmy Kimmel moment, that after he was canceled, then he was brought back. So now Jimmy Kimmel Live is not only back on the air nationwide, but
Right.
his traveling show is now in Brooklyn. So that's where the show is taping at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. That's this week. You will remember, just to recap, over the past weekend, Nexstar and Sinclair, who own almost 70 ABC stations across the country, they ended their boycott of Jimmy Kimmel's show, and their move came days after Kimmel's suspension by ABC. That ended. Then the local stations brought him back. So, of course, Kimmel was pulled off the air, just to remind everyone, 2 weeks ago over his monologue comments about the MAGA base that were seen as insensitive, ill-timed after the Charlie Kirk assassination. So he returned to the air last Wednesday, and he, since then, guys, has had his highest ratings in a decade. No surprise.
Yeah, something like, what, 6.26 million viewers on broadcast and 21 million plus views on YouTube.
Not bad.
People really wanted to see what he had to say. There's some behind-the-scenes reporting I was reading on Puck that there are a lot of concerns at Disney, the parent company, about the so-called churn rate, where people were, canceling their subscriptions to things like Hulu and Disney Plus in the wake of the suspension. So some real dollars at stake there for the company.
I didn't know there was a name for that, churn rate.
There you go. We're
Thank
hip
you.
and happening
I learned
here.
something new every day on this show. Okay, churn rate, got it.
Right.
Yeah,
All
of
right.
course they're worried. I mean, if people, canceling their subscriptions, yes, that would be a big worry.
Yes, it would.
Right.
Who's not worried about money right now? Taylor Swift. She's got plenty of it, and her fans assemble, everyone. Spotify's hosting an immersive 3-day pop-up experience for her highly anticipated album, The Life of a Showgirl. The event starts today. It runs through the end of Thursday in New York City. Now, we can't share with you where this is happening because they don't announce that until day of. This is billed, though, as an event to give fans a chance to step into her world before her album drops. So from noon to 9 p.m. every day, you're going to have photo ops. There are going to be some hidden Easter eggs about the album, all part of Taylor's global marketing blitz ahead of her album release coming up, drum roll please, this Friday. The drummer is obviously having breakfast right now, but there is also the movie premiere, Allison, of Taylor Swift, the official release party of a Showgirl. That's happening at theaters nationwide on Friday, bringing tons of people back into theaters. We know theater owners gotta love that too.
I don't get it though, Mark. What's an immersive Taylor Swift experience? Are we all now engaged to Travis Kelce? Like, what do we get to do with this immersive?
I choose my words very carefully right now because I do not want to anger Swifties across America, across the world. But is she not already a ubiquitous pop culture presence? Is there a need for more immersion? It's a look of fear.
Fear. I was going to say, look like disapproval.
But I'm still trying to state facts. It is what
Mark,
it is.
That is such a great perspective that I hadn't thought of. We have been having an immersive Taylor Swift experience already, just at our homes, because she rules the world. So how will this be any different? I like that. We need to get the answer to that. What you get when you go into this immersive experience.
Maybe we'll hear from some Swifties after they've done it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Meanwhile, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
President Trump, as you know, wants things to be produced in the United States. That's all behind his tariff plan. He also wants to bring movie making back to the U.S. That had gotten too expensive in some cities. So he is ready to use, he says, a 100% tariff to force Hollywood studios to make it happen somehow. President Trump announced his latest tariff on his own social platform, and he's targeting any movie made outside of the U.S. Hollywood and California officials warn it could hurt consumers and production logistics. Supporters say California has been hit hard by studios lured by tax incentives, as we know, to shoot in other places that are much less expensive. Canada, New Zealand, to just name a few. So US film spending is down 27% year over year as states and countries continue to attract productions. It's interesting, guys, much like all of the other things that President Trump's tariffs affect, it's hard to just flip a switch and be like, okay, now all movies are going to be made here in the US and bring back, all of the production crews and the equipment from overseas. But that is what he's trying to do.
And also some confusion, I think, around what do you mean by made in the U.S., because there are aspects of a film that might be shot in the U.S., but then, part of the editing may be done overseas, or some other technical aspects that are handled by studios in the U.K. So it gets very complicated when you talk about a film that's 100% made in the U.S.
And there's potentially also a ripple effect. You see here in New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy made a complete tax incentive program to encourage people to film here in New Jersey. Deliver Me From Nowhere, the new Springsteen movie, was filmed in a diner down the block from my house in Newark. So what happens to these productions now and across the country?
Were you in?
Yeah.
Do you have a cameo in that?
I should, for all the hash and eggs I bailed at this diner, but no, sadly no.
I see. So now you've gone to a different diner to try your luck, to the Sunrise Diner, and that's working out better for you, I would say, Mark.
Listen, the tomato, avocado, and egg omelet I get every day, keeping me alive. I'm very
Much
grateful.
better.
Right.
Much better.
Hey, want to show you an amazing video of a humpback whale being freed in British Columbia after it got tangled in 450 feet of rope and fishing gear. There it is. It took rescuers 6 hours to free Fader, is its name, with help from Marine Mammal Rescue, Victoria Whale Protection, and the Canadian Defence Forum. So all hands on deck here. Fader was spotted by whale watch vessels with an orange float that was trailing behind him. A satellite tag helped then track the whale until the full rescue operation could get underway. After the rescue, Fader was seen swimming freely and healthy, sending a message to vigilant boaters.
Wow.
If you see something like that, you see the whale entangled like that, it can be very, very dangerous. It can impact their ability to feed and travel, which they, are wont to do, and it can ultimately be fatal. So kudos
Absolutely.
to
It
the crew
looked
that saw them.
awful. Just how hard it was during those 6 hours to even untangle Fader from that net. And thank goodness that we have the technology and know how to do that. That just looked awful, what the whale was dragging along.
Now, I don't think you want to bring a whale to the classroom, but maybe some other kind of pet while we're on this topic of mammals and animals. Classroom pets are more than just a fun addition, guys. A new survey shows they can boost attendance in school, improve test scores, lower that anxiety that's out there for our young people, even teach kids responsibility. Look at that face. With more on that, let's go to psychologist Dr. Jeff Gardier once again with us on Connecting America. Good morning. Tell us about this survey. We love this idea.
Yeah, this survey is really interesting. And Jim, it talked about all of the things that you've said. They've been giving grants from the Pets in the Classroom program, and it's run by an organization called Pet Care Trust. And so what they've done is that they've provided money for guinea pigs, hamsters, geckos, fish, maybe even dogs, if they can get them into the classroom. And what it has shown is exactly what you've said: improved attendance by kids, reduced anxiety levels, fosters empathy and compassion, develops social skills, boosts self-esteem. My kids have attended schools where they've had these sorts of animals, reptiles, and so on, and you could see the joy on their faces by having the responsibility of caring for these animals and different sorts of pets. So this is something that we're going to see more and more in our classrooms.
This is adorable. That video that we were just showing where the dog wants to hold hands with one of the students, and the student is trying to do work. You see there with his pencil, but he has to like turn and hold the dog's hand. It is so cute. But Dr. Gardner, I get why it's a mood boost, okay? And I get why it's
Oh.
fun to have this adorable dog in the classroom. But how does it improve their self-esteem? I mean, how does it have this whole other ripple effect on emotional effects on the students?
Well, more than anything else, Allison, it reduces the anxiety that kids have. Anxiety, as we know, is a major, major issue for all of us as adults and children and so on. And it gets in the way of learning, it gets in the way of developing social skills. So, by reducing that anxiety, what we tend to see is that the unconditional love that these animals and pets give us helps us to develop non judgmental feelings, and that stable presence reduces that loneliness that children tend to have. But just feeling good overall by being able to be part of the lives of these pets, taking care of living things, really does help the children, because it's not just about academic learning in schools, it's also about social emotional learning, and it helps with all of those things.
You know, doctor, you're talking about emotional learning. It's really moving to see that young child and that dog interacting with each other and basically holding hands. How can caring for a pet help students build empathy and compassion and social skills?
Well, what we tend to see is that they're just not thinking about themselves. Now the focus goes out to other beings, as I said, other living things, rather. And by doing that, it really does show them that they have a responsibility outside of themselves, getting outside of their own bodies, outside of their own minds, and knowing that society is something that is very important. And then that transfers a mark on to other children, and having the compassion and empathy that they had for the pets now is transferred onto other students and their friends, of course.
I was just laughing at that hamster on a wheel. Sometimes we feel like that, right? But um, having a pet in class, you would think maybe, depending on the pet, it might be a distraction for young students. But there are reports that it actually helps improve grades for some students.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we tend to see is that the teachers that were part of this particular study reported fewer discipline issues and better grades for some of their students. And a lot of that comes from, as I said, not only reducing stress, but teaching that responsibility and fostering a more positive and engaging learning environment, which is the most important thing. Students actually, Jim, look forward to going to class and interacting with these living things. And when you bring those dogs in, we are seeing in medical schools, law schools, and so on, that emotional support animals are now accompanying students. And not only does it help that particular student in dealing with anxiety or some other mental health challenge, but the students around that particular student who has the animal are also getting the benefit. So this is the gift that keeps on giving.
Dr. Jeff, we
Yeah.
appreciate it. I want to meet that pup with the paw.
I know. That is just a shockingly cute video where the little boy is like, I'm supposed to be coloring, but now I'm holding this dog's paw. Okay. And it was so cute. That dog is really a cutie pie.
Oh, so sweet.
He's smiling also, I'd like to
He
point
does
out.
look like he's smiling.
Absolutely.
So where's Tula? Cue Tula, the
Yeah,
Camerata pet.
Tula, I know.
Oh,
Tula is basically told me she's unavailable until a few more hours.
she's unavailable for photography.
Yeah. No treats,
She's
no
sleeping in.
TV.
She's
Right.
sleeping in right now.
She's like a teenager. All right, we're going to be back at the top of the hour. And as the diner fills up, we'll hopefully try to talk to some people who are here about what's on their mind on this Tuesday. We'll be right back.
The views expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of USA Today or its affiliates.
Good morning and welcome back to Connecting America on the USA Today streaming channels on this Tuesday morning. I'm Jim Rosenfield alongside Mark Bonamo here at Sunrise Dine in Roselle Park, New Jersey. Allison Camerata is joining us once again from her global home quarters this morning. Glad to have you back here, Allison, after you were traveling out west a bit.
Yeah, I'll show you guys some pictures later. I went to the Aspen Literary Festival and had a chance to hobnob and interview some of the best-selling authors in the country, in the world, and it was just wonderful. And Aspen this time of year is so stunningly beautiful, so it was really, really exciting. Now, I was there in this whole milieu of authors. At the same time, there was another event, top secret event, where I'm told Justin Trudeau was there with Katy Perry. Okay, so I'm just giving you a little bit of juice, a little bit of juice here this morning on Connecting America. Oh yeah,
No sightings?
not by me. Other people, there were some sightings. Yeah.
Okay. What's going on in the news this morning, Allison? It's at the
Okay,
8 o'clock hour.
Yeah. We do want to bring everybody up to speed on what happened in Michigan. So we're learning more about the Michigan man who went on this deadly rampage at a church of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc Township. This church is located 60 miles northwest of Detroit. Multiple people who knew the suspect, he was a former Marine named Thomas Jacob Sanford, and they say he had major emotional problems with the Mormon church. He talked about it a lot. Police say that Sanford killed 4 people and wounded 8 others after ramming his truck, I should say, into the church building on Sunday. The 40-year-old then set fire to the church and destroyed the building. He was eventually shot and killed by the police. Now, the victims in this case range in age from just 6 years old to 78 years old.
Such a tragedy. And for the latest, we are joined this morning by Detroit Free Press criminal justice reporter Andrea May Sahuri. Andrea, thanks for joining us here on Connecting America. Share with us what more perhaps you've learned about the shooter.
Yeah, definitely been a crazy ride the past few days. Speaking to people that went to high school with him in Goodrich, which is, not far from Grand Blanc. Back then I'm hearing he was very polite, funny guy. But did hear that when he came back from the Army, something was a little off. He had struggled with some drug addiction, moved out west for a bit, came back. And, I had spoken to someone, a political candidate in nearby Burton, Michigan, which is also near Grand Blanc, Goodrich, Flint area. And he had been canvassing a week before and stopped at this man's house. And he had been talking to him. He was really engaging. He was nice, polite, and then ended up getting in this tirade by the end of the conversation about the LDS Church, Latter-day Saints Church, Mormonism, asking this political candidate about what his thoughts on it, and then eventually kind of saying that Mormonism, Mormons are the Antichrist, which is a pretty alarming statement. We still don't know. FBI is still not giving out a motive. They do say this is a targeted attack, but they're still working a motive. And really, there's still limited information we have on that front from the FBI, which is now leading the investigation.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, it's hard, as you point out, to kind of disentangle his emotional issues from whatever he was claiming to be angered about with the Mormon Church. It sounds like from your reporting and from what we've read that he was in this relationship in Utah. It ended badly, but 10 years later, he was still talking about it and still struggling with it and railing against it. But he had gotten married, and apparently he also had a child that he was caring for with a rare genetic disorder. Then there was his military service. So it just sounds like there were some deep-seated emotional issues. Let's talk about the victims here. So do you know if there are still people who are hospitalized this morning?
Yeah, I believe so. I do want to say one more thing though about when we talk about the suspect, I do still think it's important. The governor had mentioned we should lower the rhetoric, or cool the temperature on rhetoric, and be mindful of social media and not come to conclusions. We still don't. There's still a lot we don't know, and so I definitely don't want to play a part in spreading, engaging in any rumors. Obviously, this is just what we have been reporting. But I just wanted to mention that before we go on. But yes, the victims, all of them are now accounted for, which is good. In this tragedy, good news. We were fearing that there would be more. There's one victim in critical condition still, as of yesterday afternoon, and the total, including the suspect, 5 people deceased.
Andrea, these shootings are shattering. How is the community responding from neighbors, local churches, community leaders?
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is not the first mass shooting I've had to cover. But in any shooting, especially in these small towns, I mean, really people just step up. From the first day, local restaurants were donating food to first responders. There's now this fund, this Grand Blank Strong fund set up by local businesses to help support victims and their families and the community. And, schools closed, the day after the shooting. And it's just really nice to see. I'm actually from this area, so this is, a surreal experience. But just seeing again everyone step up to the plate has been empowering as well.
Andrea May Sahuri with the Detroit Free Press. We appreciate you joining us, and makes a good point. It is still fairly early in the investigation. We know investigators need to do their job to drill down to what the motive may have been, if we'll ever really know what the motive was, because important to point out the shooter is deceased as well, killed by police in a shootout.
Well, that's the point, Jim. I mean, I find, I was a crime reporter in a past life for many,
Yeah.
many years. And I'll tell you, it's never satisfying. Whatever the motive is, even when the motive comes out, it's never satisfying, because there's still no excuse for ever resorting to this level of violence. And so, you can find out bits and pieces about what any suspect or murderer was thinking. But at the end of the day, it does generally 99% reflect some deep emotional situation, because resorting to killing strangers in a church, it just has to be an emotional defect.
Yeah, we know his own father apologized to a reporter for his son's actions, and said, when asked about, how was his behavior or what might have led to this, he said, the important thing is this has happened, and we have to deal with the aftermath. So let's check on some other big news of the day. We're talking about the Middle East here, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by his side there at the White House. President Trump unveiled a detailed 20-point plan to try to end the nearly 2-year-old war in Gaza. Now, that plan calls for an immediate ceasefire, with Israel withdrawing to allow hostages to be returned within 72 hours of the acceptance of the plan by all sides. Hundreds of detained Gazans, including women and children, would also be released alongside prisoners who were serving life sentences. Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence, they'd get amnesty or safe passage out of Gaza. They'd have to lay down their arms. International aid and reconstruction would also begin immediately, or stepped up, including infrastructure, hospitals, roads, which have to be rebuilt. So much destruction in Gaza, as we've seen over the many, many months of this war. And a transitional Palestinian governance body called the Board of Peace would actually be led by President Trump and include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, as well as others. The president said that Board of Peace would oversee post-war Gaza's redevelopment and economic stability. Now, Netanyahu said he endorsed this White House plan, but he warned Hamas about the consequences if they don't agree.
If accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours. And it means the immediate end to the war itself, not just Gaza. It's the war itself. Under the plan, Arab and Muslim countries have committed, and in writing in many cases, but I actually would take their word for it. The people I mentioned, I'd take their word for it, to demilitarize Gaza, and that's quickly. Decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terror organizations.
But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way.
So some threatening words there from Netanyahu. Hamas saying at this point it wasn't consulted on this plan before it was released, but is reportedly looking at the plan in good faith. The Palestinian Authority, meanwhile, said they welcome this announcement. Several far-right Israeli lawmakers in the coalition government said, though, they don't support Netanyahu accepting this plan. Controversial for them. So joining us now with some more perspective from Israel is David Sussman from Efrat right now, 20 minutes outside Jerusalem. He's the host of Land of the Bible as well. David, thanks for being here this morning. So how has this plan been received in Israel, would you say? And what pressures is Netanyahu facing from the public and also his many political rivals?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on. Um, I think most Israelis are approaching this very cautiously. This isn't the first time that a ceasefire has been worked out with Hamas, and since they, seized power in Gaza through a bloody coup against the Palestinian Authority, where they killed literally hundreds of opponents of theirs by throwing them off the roofs of buildings, they have broken every ceasefire that they have made with Israel, including on October 7th. We were in the midst of a ceasefire with them, and they broke it on October 7th. So I think most Israelis are approaching it cautiously. First of all, is Hamas going to keep their word? They've never done it before. If you look at their charter calls for the utter destruction of Israel. So it's kind of hard to trust them. But let's say they agree to these terms. Somehow, President Trump mentioned how there was 20,000 Hamas fighters that were killed. Many of their leaders have been eliminated. And maybe whoever now is, steering the ship in Gaza, maybe they have empathy for the first time and care about the citizens and the people of Gaza and want to put an end to this war. And they're willing to lay down their arms and disarm themselves, have nothing to do with a political future in Gaza. Maybe some of them will leave. The international body that's going to be there, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, possibly Turkey, these are all Middle Eastern or Muslim countries that seem to be on board with this peace treaty. But when you look at Qatar, you look at their funding of the Muslim Brotherhood, you look at Al Jazeera and the way that they have framed Israel in a negative way, it's very hard to trust those places as well. Now, that being said, I think a lot of people also are very excited about the possibility of the war ending, the hostages coming home, husbands and sons, daughters, loved ones coming back from war. And hopefully, I think most Israeli, we always dream of a brighter future, and we're always willing to give it a shot.
David, when you brought up the hostages, it's really staggering to think that it's been 2 years. I mean, it's almost, we're a week away basically from it being 2 years. Do we know today the status of those 47 hostages that were taken back on October 7th?
Yeah, it is absolutely heartbreaking. A lot of people here in Israel wear a piece of tape on their shirt with the amount of days that these poor souls have been, in the worst conditions possible as hostages of Hamas. It breaks all of our hearts. As far as their conditions, I think the information coming out is extremely limited. There's been reports as few as 8 hostages remain alive, as many as 28 remain alive. We'll see. The videos that have come out that Hamas has used in their propaganda, their conditions look terrible. If we look at the conditions of the hostages who have been released when they were released, their conditions were very, very difficult to stomach. They need a lot of rehabilitation, a lot of medical work being done to them. And we just pray and we hope that when they come back, that they'll be able to heal physically, mentally, and spiritually.
David Sussman reporting for us from Israel itself with reaction to this proposed peace plan. And we know a part of the sort of machinations, Allison, involved Netanyahu actually speaking with the leadership in Qatar to apologize for the attack that they carried out to try to take out Hamas leadership. I know that was a sticking point, and that apology was apparently issued ahead of the announcement of this proposed plan. So significant
So
there
we'll
as
see
well.
if the momentum carries on. All right, back here. The countdown is on for the federal government to shut down at midnight tonight unless Democrats and Republicans in Congress agree on this last minute deal. President Trump met with top congressional leaders from both parties yesterday, but no deal happened afterwards. Democrats are pushing to extend health care subsidies for Americans, while Republicans want to maintain current funding levels, so less health care support for Americans for the next 7 weeks. But they want to, in other words, kick the can down the road for 7 more weeks. The Senate plans to bring up the House passed funding bill for another vote today in an effort to prevent a shutdown, guys. I mean, just here we are again. This seems to happen a lot in Washington, and somehow they usually pull it off at the 11th hour.
Was it a nickel that you wanted for every one of these
No, I want a
potential?
dollar. I want a
Dollar.
dollar.
That was it. Okay. So some stats here for you. 21 of these government funding gaps since 1976 and 14 actual government shutdowns that we've watched and witnessed happening. With more on what we might be able to expect in the next several hours, we're joined by Republican analyst Paul Kanitra. Paul, thanks for joining us this morning on Connecting America. What is going on today? Time is running out. Is there any hope that this can be stopped? Avoid the shutdown.
As of just a couple minutes ago, it seems like we're at a stalemate. We're heading for a government shutdown, and I think that's kind of what both sides want, depending on their own political calculus, right? I think it's inevitable at this point.
Hey, Paul, as you know, Democrats say, hey, Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House. This is on them. So, what's your response to that?
Well, that's what they're banking on. And I think they're banking on the fact that the average person isn't paying attention to the details enough and that they're just saying, oh, look, Republicans are in charge, they're shutting down the government. But the nuance is a lot more detailed than that, right? The reality of the situation is the Republicans are just trying to pass a CR, a clean CR, and Democrats are trying to claw back things that they lost in the big, beautiful bill. And obviously it's always under the guise of just generic healthcare. But in reality, what really is going on is Democrats are trying to add things to this clean resolution. Under Biden, Republicans granted Democrats, I believe, 13 different clean resolutions, CRs, continuing resolutions. So it's absolutely ridiculous. And the things that they're trying to climb back when they're talking about healthcare, they're trying to claw back regular check-ins to check to see if people are legal residents. They're trying to check and claw back work requirements because obviously in the big beautiful bill, if you're in your 60s and you're able-bodied, you need to be able to work. And those are the things that they're clawing back. Republicans aren't looking to take health care away from people. Democrats are the ones that are holding everybody hostage here, and that's the reality of the situation.
We're seeing some critical gubernatorial elections coming up in this fall, both in Virginia and here in New Jersey. Democrat Mikey Sherrill, Republican candidate Jack Ciattarelli. What could this shutdown mean for these elections heading into the fall?
Again, I guess it depends on how you spin it, right? Republicans have already said that if we go into a shutdown, that they're going to offset the costs. So there's not going to be as many costs to the American people. But what are they offsetting it with? They're going to lay off 100,000 federal workers, right? Most of those federal workers are probably coming from Northern Virginia and Maryland. So it's not going to help the Virginia gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side very much. But in New Jersey, we're a little bit insulated from that. In fact, I think we're more interested in the energy crisis that's been created by the last 8 years of Governor Murphy's rule.
Hey, Paul, if there is a shutdown, we know the White House is said to be looking at turning some of the furloughs into permanent layoffs. Is that a good move, or could that backfire if you're going to put more people out of work?
Seems to be a recurring theme this morning that it depends on who's spinning it and who's actually eating up the spin here, right? Republicans are trying to streamline government. These are positions that they've deemed in offices that they've deemed non-essential, and now they have a pathway to clean that up. I think the average person believes that there's a lot of government bloat, and I think that that's gonna fall on the Republican side in this.
All right, Paul Kanitra, thank you very much for coming in with the Republican perspective on all of this. Okay, so after the break, we're going to speak to a doctor about 3 COVID strains that you need to know about. These are spreading across the country and what you need to do today to protect yourself. And guys, Tula has just made an appearance in the kitchen. She will be with us when we come right back.
That'll bring smiles to our faces, Allison. Can't wait to see her. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connecting America. The diner's filling up, but all eyes are focused right there on you, Allison, with Tula. Oh.
Tula has finally made an appearance in our global home quarters here because she wants to hear about the Aspen Literary Festival. So
Did
that's
she
where I
go
was.
or she stayed home?
No, Tula is an indoor dog. Tula is not going to be hiking any beautiful Aspen mountain trails
No?
or going on a plane. No, Tula likes to
Okay.
be right here, as you can see, in this exact position, as a matter of fact.
That
So
face.
anyway, it was the first ever Aspen Literary Festival, and I was really honored to be able to go and be a moderator. I interviewed 7 of the authors, all of them best-selling there. And so I'll just share a few pictures with you. The first one that I want
Please.
to talk about is Michael Lewis. Okay, so Michael Lewis is this renowned, acclaimed author. You know him from The Big Short, from Moneyball, from The Blind Side. He wrote all of those. He has a new book out, which is really fascinating, guys, and it's very relevant for what we're talking about today. It's called Who is Government? And it talks about the hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats who we tend to see as this kind of faceless, nameless, gray blob, but how they are doing remarkable things that are affecting all of our lives in a positive way, saving our lives. I mean, he explained one was a coal miner, and he figured out a way to keep coal mines from falling in on coal miners. And so from the roofs collapsing, basically. So that's just one person, who just made a discovery and saved countless lives. And then there are so many of them. So he's highlighting that in this book called Who is Government? I highly recommend it. Also, I was with Ellen Hildebrand, famous, best-selling beach read author, and Jasmine Guillory. So Jasmine is there in the other pink suit. We're both the pink bookends there. She's written phenomenal, fun women's basically literature. One is called The Proposal. Her new one is called Flirting Lessons. Right next to her is Adrienne Brodeur, who organized the entire festival. And then there's Ellen Hildebrand, who, she just did The Perfect Couple on Netflix. I mean, these are just incredibly successful authors there.
Are you
And
a
then
big
last,
beach reader, Allison? Do you like to escape and just dive into
I do,
some
I
kind of,
do.
yeah.
And that's what we were talking about, that like sometimes the beach read or romance novel has been maligned as sort of not being highbrow enough, but they're an escape. And that's a really valuable service for, the millions of readers who turn these into bestsellers. It's great. And they're really compelling. And then last, a super interesting guy who I'm sure you know his name because he's notorious. This is James Fry. Okay. So our viewers will remember that James Fry was the center of the infamous Oprah scandal around A Million Little Pieces, his memoir 20 years ago, that it turned out he had been embellished, that some of it about, a couple of scenes did not play out exactly as he wrote.
Mhm.
And that he was really vilified for something that I don't think was that bad. He said 85% of the book was true, and we published it as a memoir. And I guess I should have been more transparent about that. But now, the idea that that would be an international scandal seems so funny, basically. So yeah, so that was the Tula's getting impatient. So I had a great weekend there, and again, Aspen was just so beautiful.
Did you get to talk at all about your memoir, or that was not the appropriate time
Oh,
for that?
thank you very much. So Combat Love, now out in paperback. They were very kind. They were very kind in introducing it and talking about like the woman who introduced me talked about it, but I tried not to steer it back to my memoir because there was so much to talk about with these authors and I wanted to hear about their books. But it was very nice just to hobnob with all
Yeah.
of the best-selling authors and be in that world for this weekend.
All right. So you were traveling. This can always be a concern when you're on airplanes, right? And going to other places, being around lots of people in an enclosed space, COVID. It's back in the headlines, guys, with 3 variants now circulating across the country. Most recently, wastewater testing in South Carolina. It shows very high levels of the newest strain, XFG, or Stratus is what they're calling this one. Combined, the 3 strains are contributing to a nationwide upswing. So be careful, everybody. If you don't feel well, test yourself. New FDA rules limit who can get the vaccine. We know that, although states like California and New York are adopting their own guidelines. New Jersey also aiming to end vaccine mandates. So just something to be aware of, that it is still out there. And if you're not feeling well, and you think, oh, it's just a cold, perhaps you want to do a rapid test and see if that's the case.
Yeah, so let's bring in our doctor to help us sort all this out. So we're joined now by Dr. Pyle Coley, adjunct professor, Johns Hopkins University and Duke University. Doctor, thank you so much for being here. So, what are the symptoms? Are these symptoms different this time around with this new strain than what we thought of last time?
So, guys, I want us to think about a multi generation family living together. So, you have the grandparents, you have the parents, then you have the kids. So, these new strains are essentially the children, the latest generation of COVID variants. And the good news is that they behave very similar to their parents. So, they cause a lot of the same symptoms. We are hearing about this razor blade variant because one of the symptoms of one of the newer strains, like Stratus, is an extremely severe sore throat. Some people say it feels like you're actually swallowing glass or there's something sharp in your throat at all times. But overall, they generally tend to cause the same symptoms. Thankfully, they're behaving like Omicron, like their parents. So they're not making you super sick, not ending you up in the hospital. And as Jim said, the tests actually work to detect these variants, even though they're newer variants, as well as Paxlovid, which is the treatment that we have. So the newer generation is always a little more naughty than the parents are, right? So that definitely the newer variants are more contagious. They spread more easily, but thankfully they don't seem to be making you sicker.
All this time during the fight against COVID, we hear about these updated vaccines over and over. Are these updated vaccines expected to protect against all these new variants, these new three variants, or just the newest strain?
Actually, the vaccine was designed against the last variant, so the parents of the newest variant, which is Stratus, but we still expect it to have really good protection because there is part of that parent in that child, as we know. In fact, I'm going for my vaccine just this Thursday. And remember, the goal of the vaccine here is not to 100% prevent infection, but to prevent severe infection and really keep people out of the hospital and make it so that COVID doesn't get in the way of our lives the way that it did in 2020.
So if people are confused by these state by state differences in terms of access and mandates about vaccines, what's the best course of action, doctor?
To be honest, Jim, I'm really confused too because every state seems to have its own rules, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of variability between states. And you think about Thanksgiving coming and Christmas coming. I live in Colorado, and so if a family member is visiting me from New York or somewhere else where the vaccine mandates are different, risk could be different. We have this concept of something called herd immunity, which is the idea that everybody behaves together in a herd. We do the same thing. And if most of us get vaccinated, then it'll protect even the ones that aren't vaccinated, aren't able to get vaccinated. But when you have this state to state variability, that can cause a problem. And at the end of the day, the more chances we give the virus to mutate by giving it opportunities to infect people, the more likely it is to mutate into something bad. So I don't think this idea of heterogeneity between states is going to serve us well heading into the winter months.
All right, Dr.
Dr. Coley,
Coley,
thank you.
thank you. Just something else to worry about as we head into the winter months. It would be interesting to see, whether this, spike turns into widespread new infections. All right, after the break, we take a closer look at the race for New York City mayor and whether that race will narrow from 3 candidates to 2. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everyone, to Connecting America. Okay, so let's talk about the quite hot race for mayor in New York City. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is trying to position himself for a one-on-one battle against the Democratic Socialist Zoran Mamdani, who I'm sure you've heard lots about. Now, the incumbent mayor, the current mayor, Eric Adams, dropped out of the race over the weekend. So the question is whether the fourth person, Curtis Sliwa, will do the same. If it is a two-man race, guys, there's this recent new Siena New York Times poll that puts former Governor Cuomo within striking distance of Zoran Mamdani, but that the equation changes if it's a three-man race. So joining you guys now in the diner is Dr. Dan Casino, professor of government and politics at Fairleigh Dickinson University.
Dr. Casino, thanks for joining us here. So what's your take on this if Curtis Sliwa, and it's a big if, right, decides to drop out of the race? Doesn't mean those voters are necessarily going to drift to Cuomo, does it?
That's exactly right. So Sliwa has said he is under no circumstances dropping out. He went to the bitter end in 2021. We don't see any evidence that that's changing. What people tend to forget is that voting is a two-stage process. First, you have to decide whether or not you're going to vote, and then you have to decide who you're going to vote for. So when candidates drop out, it's not like all their voters say, well, okay, never mind, we're going to vote for this other guy instead. Voters aren't that strategic. What actually happens, a lot of them say, well, then I'm not going to vote at all. The guy I wanted isn't in the race. I'm not going to vote. And Eric Adams, at this point, when he dropped out, he was getting 6 to 9% of the polls. A lot of those voters, they knew he wasn't going to win. They are not shifting over strategically. A lot of them just decided to drop out of the race, are probably going to drop an electorate completely. Or honestly, given that these candidates are still going on the ballot, they're going to keep on voting for them, even though they're not actually running.
Now, Cuomo has been trailing in the polls for months. We've got 5 weeks left before the election. Could a two-man race be the game changer, or is it still too steep a climb for anyone trying to go up against Zoran Mamdani?
Look, it's going to be really tough for anyone to catch up with Mamdani at this point. I mean, he's not at 50%, but this is at this point, a three-man race. Cuomo's negatives are so big. He is a well-known figure, and so it's going to be very hard for him to convince a lot of voters to put together the anti-Mamdani coalition. There just aren't that many Republicans and aren't that many independents, and the ones who do don't show up in these races. Remember, these are low-turnout elections.
So, Professor, as we all know, President Trump often likes to insert himself into local politics and local elections. Do we have a sense of who it is that President Trump wants to win? I mean, we know that he doesn't share the same politics with Mamdani, but would that somehow help him to have a Democratic Socialist as mayor to kind of act as a foil for the next few years?
So President Trump has weighed in on this race pretty strongly, and he has said in posts on his social media platform that if Mamdani were to win, he would start denying funding for New York City, saying, therefore, there's no reason to vote for Mamdani because he would basically do what happened in the 1970s to New York City and say, we're going to cut off federal funding. You guys bail yourselves out. And so, he has weighed in on this. I think he would probably prefer at this point Andrew Cuomo. And there has been talks. There's been a lot of behind-the-scenes talks about trying to get Eric Adams and Curtis Sliwa to drop out, perhaps by offering them jobs in the administration. We haven't actually seen that yet. Adams dropped out without any clear job what he was going to be doing next.
We've seen President Trump. We know he's been calling Mamdani erroneously a communist. He keeps repeating that. How much weight does that carry? Do you think New York voters are listening to what President Trump is saying about Mamdani?
I think New York voters are. If we're talking about upstate New York, sure. But New York City, the fact that Donald Trump is against you is probably a good thing. We also have to remember Donald Trump has called lots of people communists, to whom that label does not apply. So I'm not sure anyone's taking that too seriously.
Do you think there could be a very intense backlash, as a matter of fact, if Trump seems to be clearly gravitating towards Cuomo? There was a recent meeting of corporate leaders in New York where everyone's kind of sitting in the classic back room, seemingly trying to make a decision about this race.
So we've actually seen Mamdani making a lot of hay of this, the fact that corporate leaders and President Trump are against him. You can know a man by his enemies, is what Mamdani's saying. And if these people are against me, if the millionaires are against me, that means I must be on the side of the working class people.
So, Professor, is it your prediction that Curtis Sliwa will not drop out and that for the next few weeks this will go on as a three-man race? And, whatever happens. I mean, it's actually in politics, those weeks are actually a long time. It's not right around the corner. Anything could still happen.
anything could still happen. Curtis Sliwa there's nothing you can offer Sliwa that's going to be better than what he's got now, which is a platform. That's what he wants. This is a protest campaign and has been for a long time. He's got some issues. He's big on no-kill cat shelters that are actually really popular in New York City. And I think actually some of those Eric Adams voters, after I was driving out, are probably going to wind up voting for Sliwa instead. He's getting public funding. He's got everything he needs in order to stay in this race. People drop out because they know they're not going to win, or they drop out because they run out of money. Eric Adams was out of money. Curtis Sliwa is in no danger of that happening anytime soon.
Let's talk about if Mamdani is successful, he wins the race for mayor. What's the response do you see from corporate leaders in New York, those who are concerned about his agenda or his politics? Do they leave the city, or do you think that's bluster at this point?
We see this a lot of times, especially here in New Jersey. People saying, "Oh, if that person gets elected, the tax will go up. I'm going to get out of here." Most times, people don't do it because these are very large buildings they own, and it's really tough to pick them up and move them over to Jersey City. So they're going to probably stick around, and they're going to be working with them, and honestly, they're going to fight on the city council. So the policies don't go through just because Mamdani wants them.
Dan Casino, good perspective for us here in the Sunrise Diner on this Tuesday morning. We appreciate you coming in for us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get you some coffee and maybe some eggs. All right. When we come right back, what goes perfectly with eggs and toast? Beer. Apparently, or maybe not. We're going to test that out. We're going to learn about craft beers when we come right back. Allison,
Oh, it sounds exciting. Can't wait to watch.
To you.
Okay.
Maybe a Bloody Mary.
Welcome back to the Sunrise Diner here in Roselle Park, New Jersey, here on this Tuesday morning. We have this display here for you. We're having some bubbly this morning, Allison. When we say bubbly, we're talking about beer, because you know what? It is the start of Oktoberfest, and what better way to celebrate than
Beer and eggs.
with a flight of
Let's
beer?
go.
Yeah,
and the
Right.
start of the morning. So beer for breakfast. I like it, guys. I like it. Tell me
and
what
we've
I need
got
to
some
know.
guests here with us. Tim Hewitt, founder, owner, and master brewer of Wet Ticket Brewing in Rahway, New Jersey. And alongside Tim is Al Pabalski, also an owner at Wet Ticket Brewing. Guys, thanks for being here this morning. Do you usually come to the diner at 8 in the morning and start drinking, or
No.
But we're glad you did for us. What's with the name, first of all, Wet Ticket? Where
So
did that come from?
the wet ticket party, thank goodness for the wet ticket party, because it was a time in this country when people decided it was going to be the right thing to take away our right to have a beer. So you still had your Republicans, you still had your Democrats, but you had to declare whether you're on the wet side of the issue or the dry side. So thank God we won. And that,
we know for a while craft breweries were popping up. It felt like everywhere, right? Around 120 of them in New Jersey. Is that the statistic? And Brewers Association says 10,000 around the country. How is business right now for you guys?
I would say right now there's definitely headwinds. People are changing their what they want to drink or what they don't want to drink, but we have seen resurgence in our tasting rooms. So there still is demand for the beer.
You're talking about headwinds. Why do you think that is?
I think people have changed what they do. They don't drink as much anymore.
you got THC beverages, you've got seltzers, you've got canned cocktails with so many different alternatives. For us, our business is up, and I think we've totally kind of leaned into being part of the community. The brewery business, not only for us, but for breweries across the country, for the most part, has really become more and more hyper-local, meaning that people are willing to shop and buy from people that they have a relationship with, and they walk into our tasting room every day. So in that sense, business has been good for us.
I don't know if Allison is a big beer drinker or was back in the day, if that was her beverage of choice, but any questions for the guys, Allison?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, back in the day when there was just a keg at a party, sure, I drank beer. Yes. I don't know that it was the high-end beer that these guys are making. I mean, I think that in terms of the spectrum, what they're doing is much more sophisticated than the, Miller Lite that I was drinking. But so guys, is it getting harder to make beer? I mean, in terms of the raw ingredients, in terms of inflation, is that impacting you guys?
Certainly, we've seen an attitude with our customers that the economy had give them some trepidation. We certainly have had some significant increases in what our raw material costs are, the cost of our cans. So it has been a struggle, and I think that's one of the headwinds that Al was talking about. But we're dealing with it. We're trying to create a competitive environment and a place where people not only are willing to pay the extra couple of bucks it might be to have a pint of craft beer versus Allison, your Miller Lite that we all, that style of beer we all grew up on. And for us, it seems to be working.
Now we have an array of fall flavors brought here by you for Oktoberfest. Please tell us about
this one. Is Droning On is the name of this one.
So you can you can imagine what that basically was born when all the drones were out flying all over, and our politicians and all the experts were just droning on with no common sense, and that was the birth of that beer.
Do you have a favorite here that you think we should try?
Well, I think Al and I both say they're like our kids. It's hard to have a favorite, but right now, what really sells well is our Scarecrow juice. It's a pumpkin ale, named by my wife, and like a lot of the beers we have, I think it's perfectly balanced. It's problems with a pumpkin beer can be too much pumpkin, too much spice, too much hops.
Which one?
We really have a nice balance.
I'm down. If you want me to take a taste.
So sometimes people.
What time is it?
Yeah, that's okay.
9 Eastern, but somewhere it's 5 o'clock.
It's 5 o'clock.
But I mean, Jim, it's pumpkin, okay? So it's good for you.
So both Al and I come from a corporate environment, and what I always say is, well, was there anything bad that you don't like about being a brewer? owning a brewery. And this is
And
about the
what's
only
the
thing is that once in a while I got to wake up and drink a stout at 8 o'clock in the morning to see if it's ready to package.
That's yeah,
So
that's not Tim. That's a real occupational hazard. It sounds like. But what's the alcohol percentage in those?
they range anywhere from, I think, the droning on the American light lager. That's what you and I would have been drinking at the kegger, Allison. That is like a little under 5%, up to the fully juiced here. This is kind of in the whole scheme of things, a newer style in the craft beer world, a New England IPA, which is really kind of driven the boom in the craft beer business.
It's a party now, guys, because Trish is here, our favorite server.
Beer in the morning. Who knew?
It's allowed this morning
This
on
morning.
the job if you so desire. We're drinking pumpkin-infused
Scarecrow juice.
Scarecrow juice. Here's a glass for Trish.
Thank you.
Beautiful. And
Trish, are you a beer drinker?
Are you a beer drinker? Allison's asking.
I do enjoy a beer.
Okay. Are we going to taste together? Cheers. It's actually really nice. Cheers.
Tell me about it. It sounds fantastic.
I mean, it's not overpowered by pumpkin, is what I would say. It's kind of refreshing.
So 100% when we developed this beer, of course, you go out and you taste everything that everybody has. And there were so many that were too much pumpkin, too much spice, not enough malt, too much hops. And I think that's the reason why our serious beer drinkers will have a pumpkin beer, and then we'll put a maple syrup rim and dip it in a sugar and spice mix. And they love that too.
What about non-alcoholic drinks? You said that's part of the headwinds you're facing. People are deciding not to drink or imbibe in alcohol. So are you part of that trend as well?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Are you thinking about it, or?
We've thought about it, but
I don't want you to reveal any corporate secrets.
We're trying to perfect our beer first.
Okay, good. All right.
It's a competitive beer market out there. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you stand out?
I mean, I think every brewery has their own style. And we try to focus on our product and make it a high quality product, and that's how you separate yourselves from others.
Yeah, so it's the individual beers, and I think from our tasting room perspective, and I think what other brewers are doing around the country, is you have to have a variety of beers. You're going to have some people who want to come in and have something that's like a Bud Light, but you're also going to want to have somebody comes in and wants to have a New England IPA or a fruit beer or a Kolsch, a simple German ale.
I love a fruit beer. I love those. They're so refreshing. But guys, what's wrong with kids today? Why are they drinking hard seltzers? I mean, why aren't they drinking these delicious beers? Like, how do you explain the advent of the hard seltzer?
We'll have to get into that on another edition of Connecting America. Hold that thought, because we need to leave you here. We'll continue the conversation here at the table. And cheers to you, Allison, and everybody at home.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching.
I'm just going to have some coffee.